time theft is tricky in the context that we're talking about it, because a lot of times it looks productive on the surface. A lot of times our most theft, like our most thievery, happens with employees who look like they work long hours. They send lots of emails. They seem really dedicated. But it's when you dig deeper that the math doesn't add up.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how.
So normally Tonya starts these episodes, but I'm starting it today because we are doing these things live throughout the year. And I don't know if you just heard that beep, 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 but I have smoke alarm that needs a battery change. And of course, it's at the very top of a vaulted ceiling. And I don't have access to the giant ladder. Well, actually, I do have access to it, but no one wants me carrying in the giant ladder by myself into the house, doing all of the things. And unfortunately, the husband is out of town just until later today. And so we're recording with the beep, beep, beep that's randomly happening in the background. And it reminded both of us that we really wish we lived closer to Vancouver, Washington, where our mutual friend, Mary Williams, has just started opening her new recording, podcast studio for all of the things, the Sasquatch Media Grounds. And so it's one of those things that's like, yeah, sometimes actually making those additional investments could really, really pay off, because if we had done that, this would be Mary's problem and not our problem.
Yeah. And Mary would call the building maintenance guy because the studio is like inside of a larger building. But yes, I'm like, what would it take for us to fly to Vancouver for like a week at a time, and we'll just record in Mary's studio? It'd be great. I would love for this to be Mary's problem.
Yeah, I would too, but we're not quite there yet.
No.
But we may get there at some point. So I have that in my hope list. So given that, we're asking all of our listeners to be patient. It'll probably be this episode and probably the next episode. I think we're recording 2 episodes today.
Yep.
So sorry about that. Hopefully we'll be able to eliminate it mostly, and it's kind of random. So the rest of the time I'm going to mute my mic and we'll try to not make it too annoying.
Do our best. All right. And with that,
take it away, Tonya.
Yes. So with that, let's get into today's episode, which is the time thieves you never see coming. So let me set the stage for you. This is the team member, right? They're always busy. Maybe it's a coworker, but they're always busy. They're always working, but somehow nothing important seems to get done. Right? So these time thieves are the team members, the employees, the contractors or subcontractors who steal your most valuable resource while looking incredibly dedicated. They are the hardest thieves to spot because they're not lazy. They are just spectacularly inefficient. So if you've been tracking with us, if this is not your first episode, you will know that this is part 3 in a series of 4 where we have been talking about the little tiny thefts. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts that happen in business. The theft of your energy, the theft of time, the theft of money. We always think about embezzlement, right? In terms of finances. We don't think of it though with the time and energy. And so last week we talked about energy. Today I want to talk about time and what happens when those energy thieves graduate to stealing actual hours and productivity. And Gwen, you were the person who first told me of your observation where you think that theft that usually ends in money never starts with money. That you have found that usually they start by stealing your energy then the next step tends to be stealing time, and then it graduates to a theft of money. Tell me more about that.
Well, the thing is we don't try and think of time as money. But if we're paying someone to do something, time is money. Right? And so that's where it starts is, well, I get paid to work 6 hours a day. I'm picking a random number. I get paid to work 6 hours a day. And, I'm really efficient. So I get most of it done in 5. And it's okay that I don't do the additional hour of work because I got 6 hours of work done and I got it done in 5. So I should get the benefit of being able to not work those 6 hours, right? But the truth is that's not what you're getting paid for. If you're getting paid for 6 hours of work, we're paying for you to be as efficient as possible throughout the entire 6 hours. So if what someone else may take 6 hours to do, you can do in 4, we also still want you to do 2 more hours of work if we're paying you for 6 hours. Right. And so this is often where that little theft of time is. Or I run my lunch break a little bit longer. We only get 30 minutes for lunch, but I usually don't come back for 45 minutes. Right. And it's all of these little tiny things that it's very easy for us to justify. And usually it's a once or twice justification in a month. And then it becomes a once or twice justification in a week. And then it becomes a pretty consistent justification every day. And so over time, that starts adding up bits by bit by bit. And although we don't think of it as stealing, it is in fact stealing if you're getting paid for that time, right? Because you're not doing it. The other way it happens is where we expand the work to fill the time. And we've all done this. I'd love to say I've never done that, but that would be also a complete and total lie, where I may have a task. Bookkeeping is the one I like to go to and say, how long does bookkeeping take? Well, when I have 2 hours, it tends to take 2 hours. But when I only have 1 hour, basically bookkeeping tends to only take 1 hour. So does it really take 2 hours or does it take 1 hour, right? And in some cases, I know I couldn't get it done in 1 hour because there are some additional things and whatnot. But that's a place where we're staying busy. We're working all of those hours, but are we working as efficiently as we possibly can? Are we getting distracted? I need to go look this thing up, like what this charge was, and you go look it up and it's like, and I should check out these other, we've all done that too, right? Where all of a sudden one thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, and then you're down the rabbit hole. And so that's another theft of time. And so all of these are little ways that the time gets stolen, and it's really hard to track because it's not usually this big like shift from A to B. It's these little tiny bits, and it's just shifting a bit over a really long period of time. But where we tend to find it is at the point someone leaves, all of a sudden you're like, okay, so I've allocated all of this work to other people and I was paying for, I'll say 6 hours of work, and other people are getting all the exact same amount of work done in 3. And you realize, oh, I was paying for 6, but I was only getting 3.
Yeah. And this is a really tricky topic in the current climate that we have. Because, first of all, I feel like I have to say, we're really talking about, in this specific case, employee relationships, right? Because employees are paid for time. It's $20 an hour. And, your job assignment maybe is 20 hours a week. Maybe it's 30 hours a week, whatever it may be. Maybe if you're full time at 40, every state is different in the US. And, and there is an expectation that I get 8 hours of work for 8 hours of pay. But any of us who've worked in an office environment know that some of us run circles around our peers. And so it's really hard, right, to put in a full 8 hours when everybody around, when you can see that you can do in 4 hours what it takes everybody else 8 hours. So then it feels like you're being punished for being more efficient, right? So that it gets dicey there. And then there's also kind of a shift in some industries of going more on paying for results, right? Like, I don't care how long it takes you, you're paid to meet certain objectives. And if you have a 4-hour workday, great. And if you have an 8-hour workday, fine. Now, I'm going to sort of step in just to give us a good frame around this particular episode, Gwen, and say that all of that is fine and good and highly dependent on your agreement with your employer. The purpose of this episode is actually to talk to the business owner. So the business owner can have open eyes about what types of agreements they want to have with their team members, so that if you have a situation where you've got one employee who can do what the, say, shop standard, we'll just call it a shop, the shop standard 8-hour workday, if you've got one employee who can do that in 4 hours, then you potentially have a performance management situation on your hands with the other staff members, or maybe you have a superstar who's management material or something else, right? But the answer to that is not we let employee A twiddle their thumbs for half a shift just because they are more productive than employee B or C. It's like we have to step up and be real business owners and make business owner decisions. Are we tracking with each other so far?
Absolutely. And I think what happens often is that I'll say the outstanding employee realizes that they're able to get, what everyone else's 8-hour work is done in, 6. And they do feel like, well, I'm being punished for being effective.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But what we want to do, one of my favorite phrases is don't reinforce bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we need to stay really conscientious about that, to say, hey, are they really doing a good job? And can we acknowledge that? Can we be watching for those situations so that we aren't training them to not work the full time? Because at the point that we actually give them 8 hours of work, often they're like, well, I can't get this much done. And it's like, well, I bet you can. And that becomes a whole different problem. And, this is something that we have seen in multiple, client situations before, where absolutely was a great employee, but we weren't keeping them engaged enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And saying, let's make sure that we're keeping them engaged. The other thing I think we as the business owner need to do is we also need to own it's our responsibility to watch the process, watch the timesheets, watch all of those things, to be held accountable to doing that. One of the things that I see a lot of business owners do, especially when they're first bringing in their first actual employees. So they're not 1099s. They're not contractors who are invoicing you. Like, you send me an invoice and I look at it and I look at the hours and say, yeah, that all makes sense to me. I'm good with it. I pay those hours. I don't expect that it's the exact same invoice every time, because I know, this week, this school started, last week, this thing happened, we were out sick, all of the things. But when we start getting employees, one of the things that we'll do, even if we're paying them hourly, we get in the habit of saying, oh, well, they're supposed to work, 20 hours this week, so I'm paying them for 20 hours this week. It's like, but did they work 20 hours this week? Especially if they're on a timesheet. Right?
Right.
And so sometimes we're training them in bad behavior, because it's easier for us to just say, oh yeah, it's 20 hours, where they actually reported 18. Well, what that actually tells them is that we don't care if you work 18, we're going to pay you for 20.
Right. And back to, I'm going to keep drilling this in, because I know that we have service providers who listen also, who are like, well, if I can get a job done in 6 hours instead of 10 hours, but they would pay somebody else 10 hours, I should get the 10 hours of pay. My bank account should not suffer just because I'm better. But what I keep wanting to really hone in on this is it comes down to the agreement. If you are a business owner who is like, I am going to pay you for 20 hours a week, every single pay period, because that works for me. I don't actually care how long it takes you to do a job, so long as it gets done. And I happen to know there's going to be times where things go a little bit higher. And, I want to believe that it all works out in the wash, and you live in a state that allows such like loosey-goosey behavior. I do not live in such a state, but if you do, great for you. Fine. But be upfront about that. And also acknowledge that it's going to be really hard for you to adequately project and plan for replacing staff. Because if person A can get the job done in 16 hours and you're consistently paying them for 20 hours because that is what you have budgeted for, and they leave and somebody comes in who is less efficient and starts saying, well, this is a 25-hour-a-week job, you're not going to be able to turn to them and say, well, the other person got it done in 16 hours. I just paid them for 20. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So back to, what we're really trying to do with this episode is help you as a business owner understand the implications of not paying attention to this sort of thing. I get it. You don't want to deal with numbers and math. You know what? I don't either. I paid team members on retainer for the longest time because I didn't want to worry about it. But I also found myself frustrated when things didn't get done at certain points of time and not understanding why, because I didn't actually understand how much time my team was working week in, week out. So the thing that, now that we've kind of put a frame around this, that is important to recognize is time theft is tricky in the context that we're talking about it, because a lot of times it looks productive on the surface. A lot of times our most theft, like our most thievery, happens with employees who look like they work long hours. They send lots of emails. They seem really dedicated, but it's when you dig deeper that the math doesn't add up. So this may actually be your employee who's always raising their hand for overtime. This may be your employee who wants to come in and do nights and weekends. And that sounds great because not everybody wants to do nights and weekends. Like, people are really big on boundaries these days. But sometimes people like to come in on nights and weekends because there's less oversight. And sometimes people like to come in on nights and weekends because there's more dead time and there's not a special project to fill it, right? And so what we're going to talk about is, I want to talk today about 4 patterns of time theft. I want to talk a little bit, and this is actually going to be Gwen talking about this, but I want to have a conversation on the difference between being busy and being productive. Gwen, I really want you to talk a little bit from your experience on how these hidden costs compound over time, because this is an area where you have way more experience because you've worked with a lot of retailers and manufacturers. And so you've actually seen how this cripples, if doesn't cause, a retail shop or a business with small margins and low wage workers to actually collapse under the weight of payroll. And then also, how do you measure what really matters? If you really feel like impact matters more than time, well, how are you managing that so that you can fairly compare employee A from employee B? So with that, Gwen, here's the patterns that I have heard you describe over the years. And you can tell me if you think that they are different, and then we can kind of unpack them. So the first is, and Gwen would label this as, the person who got you here is not necessarily the person to get you there, right? The next level. But this
There's
is that.
A ton of that in small business.
Right.
A ton of that in small business. And it's hard because we're loyal to those people who got us here.
Right. So this is the person who will die on the hill of inefficiency, right? They want to continue using outdated systems, even though you are willing to invest in better systems, you have adopted better systems, you have trained them on better systems. They insist their way is more thorough, more careful. This way has always worked, right? It's not broken. Why should we fix it? They refuse to adapt to new tools or processes. And they actually get this interesting sense of fulfillment and satisfaction over doing things the hard way. Like, for instance, creating a proposal from scratch when templates exist. It's like they get a badge of honor for doing things manually, even though there are shortcuts available to them. Because, they just like it more, right? They like their way. Go ahead, Gwen.
It's a comfort piece, right?
Mhm.
This is the thing that I'm comfortable with. And we've had multiple clients that have dealt with this and have had, those folks say, it's like the job you hired me for doesn't exist anymore. And the answer is, well, that might actually be true, right? We would love for you to migrate with the business as the business is growing and changing and doing all of those things, but it doesn't always work. And so the person who's fighting the new process, that's always a flag. It's always a flag. Now you want to double check that you aren't missing something that in a detail that they understand that you're missing because of this new process. But most of the time, 90% of the time probably, it's because they don't want to do the new thing. They like their way. They're comfortable with those things. At the same point, there's also a whole lot of clients that we've had that have had employees is like, great, I'm ready to do the new thing. Let's go for it. Let's learn, and they totally migrate. So it's not that it always is this way, right? But it is the flag, because the person who's saying, I don't want to do it that way. I want to keep doing it this way. If they don't have really good reasoning behind it that you can get behind, it's probably problematic. This is probably the new way for them feels like it's going to take longer. And oh, by the way, it will at the beginning because we're learning something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
But usually what ends up happening is it's going to save a whole lot of time in the future going forward, right? Maybe not today, maybe not this week, maybe not even this month, but in a relatively short period, it is going to make things more efficient. That's always a flag. The other flag that's related to that is the person who can't really tell you what they're doing or keeps pushing off giving you the information that they should be able to give you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's a similar kind of thing where you're like, I need this report. Okay. We'll pick on an easy example.
Mm-hmm.
You have an in-house bookkeeper and you want a P&L as it stands right now, which may not be completely accurate. You may not have gotten all of your, all of the transactions may not be in, but you say, I want a P&L right now. There's no reason that shouldn't be able to be done. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not getting it, what it means is they don't have any of the transactions in at all, right? Like we're recording this in the middle of a month, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of a month, I wouldn't necessarily expect every transaction to be there, but I would expect some of the transactions to be there. And if I pulled a P&L and there were no transactions, that means that what have I been doing?
Mm-hmm.
What have I been working on, right? And so when folks aren't responsive in the area that they're responsible for, that's also usually a flag that they've been spending time doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you know what those other things are, that can be okay. If it, if that's well within what they're supposed to be doing. But a lot of times it's the things that they enjoy more or that they get more satisfaction from.
Mm-hmm.
But not necessarily what they should be focused on.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about the people who like to die on the hill of inefficiency. And you've talked about like some kind of other sort of types. There's another pattern, though, that I think is really common. And this is the analysis paralysis pattern. So this is the staff member who over researches every decision because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to make the wrong decision. So they're always asking for additional information that doesn't actually change any outcomes. They'll use perfectionism as procrastination on difficult tasks. I will tell you, I worked with somebody who was supposed to like turn around a report, and I found out that they were spending a whole day. I couldn't figure out what was taking so long because all they needed to do was like throw it into Word, PDF, the Word doc. But they were taking all this time because they were researching color codes so that they could brand the headers. We were not in the kind of environment that anybody needed that. We just needed a black and white printout. Nobody was going to print this in color. But they really wanted this to be like aesthetically pleasing, but that was not the assignment, right? So that's an example of perfectionism as procrastination. Or those people, and Gwen and I, we've talked about this a lot about the over-optimization. They create these elaborate systems for simple processes, and so maybe they spend 6 hours researching vendors or getting quotes for a purchase that's $200. And it's like, get a couple of quotes. And as long as it comes in at 200 or lower, let's go with it. Okay. We're not going to quibble over $5 here and $5 there. But, I've also seen where, people who really like paper, they'll insist on doing everything by hand, then typing that into a computer system. And then they want to email that to somebody else for that person to input it into a form or something else. And it's like, why don't you just input it into the form to begin with? So that, like, I don't know, I call it analysis paralysis. Maybe you'd call it like an over-researcher. I don't know. What would you say to this, Gwen?
Well, for me, the paper piece is a huge one, where I've been comfortable with paper, and I'm old, so I'm comfortable with paper. Like, I get it. Right? But we over-paperize it, right? We spend way too much time putting things on paper, getting paper copies so that we can put it in the file that we never open, that we never look at.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that this is a really a common situation because there's lots of places that it will show up. It will show up as procrastination. It will show up as, well, I want to make sure I get the right thing. One of the other things that I've seen also, and it's interesting because this tends to happen, I think, more with younger employees, is they're so used to having the internet and Google and YouTube that they don't necessarily go to the support team for the software.
Yeah.
Right? So they'll spend time researching a problem on Google or YouTube or wherever. And most applications, most software programs have some amount of support. Now, some suck. Let's just be honest. Some are really, really bad. and you can't get good information there. But at some point say, well, why have you moved on? Well, I haven't been able to find the right answer on this. And it's like, well, did you call support? Oh, no. And it's like, how many hours have you actually spent on this? 3, right? And the thing is sometimes the problem is actually the problem with the software. And the only folks that can actually fix it are the support people, right?
Right.
But if you are of a certain age, that wasn't your first option. Like if you're old, like I am, that for a while was like your only option. So it's what you absolutely think of first, right? But now that there's so much information available, we often think our best resource is to find the information ourselves, right? Which is another form of that kind of procrastination. And then I think you and I were talking, I don't know, probably a couple of months ago now, but we also talked about the difference of reading something versus watching a video of something. Because you can skim through something pretty quick and find the piece that you want. But unless the video is really well tagged, you've got to watch the whole thing. And so even if it's 5 minutes, it's not, let's say it's, it's not like it's a 30-minute video. It's just a 5-minute video. 5 minutes is still 5 minutes, where that same information in a doc, some sort of a document, you probably could have skimmed through and figured out in a minute or two. These are the very subtle time stealers that unless you're paying attention, it's really easy to miss them, and the ones that you used are great examples as well. But it's also that, oh, I'm researching this. Oh, I better check out this other thing. There is no one that's listening to this that has not gone down the rabbit hole on something at some point in time. We all know we've done it. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. But it can become a workplace habit, and that's when it becomes a problem.
Right. I mean, it's like we've all watched a YouTube video to like teach us how to do a thing. And then, the next video comes up. You're like, oh, well, maybe that'll teach me how to do this other. Right. And then you just lose track of time, which is why, like, I always have a thing when I delegate a task. It's like if you hit a roadblock at any point in time, give yourself 20 minutes, set a clock, give yourself 20 minutes to figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, either file a support ticket and then come to me and let me know, or come to me and let me know, and we'll see what we need to do, right? Because I understand not all applications have free support and all of that stuff. But I think when you delegate tasks, you've got to tell people when they get stuck how long you think they should spend trying to solve the problem themselves. Because some people will never try to solve the problem themselves. And we'll talk about that time stealer in a second. And then you've got the people who will spend a week trying to solve the problem themselves because to them, it's some kind of personal failing if they ask for help or admit that they can't figure it out. So, taking us to the third type of time stealer. So, this is the person who I'm going to say they steal everybody's time. Okay, this is the person who wants to have meetings about meetings. They want to check in at every step of a project or a task. They want confirmation and validation that they are right for even minor decisions. They create committees for things that can actually be handled by one individual. They insist on consensus. They will sit back and wait for you to tell them to move forward, even though they didn't directly tell you that they were waiting for you to tell them to move forward. They just think you're going to figure that out. They want like a 30-minute meeting to discuss a 2-minute task. Like, though, these are the people, and these are the people who also would rather have a meeting with you to tell you about the bottleneck than go and actually try to figure it out for 20 minutes. So, what have you seen of this type of, we'll call this the archetype of a time waster, time stealer?
So, in this case, the good news is it usually doesn't take too long to catch this, except often the problem is everyone thinks it's only happening to them. And so no one there's not enough sharing to say, Tanya's always coming and asking me questions. Tanya's, like if there's 15 people that all say Tanya's always coming and asking me questions, like, oh, that's a bigger problem. But everyone thinks Tonya only comes to me and asks me questions. They don't realize that Tanya is going around asking everybody questions all the time, right?
Yep.
And so that's where it really becomes, that's usually when you can't find it. When we aren't actually talking about that, right? And that whole inability to make a decision. For me, this is one of those places where a really effective accountability process actually solves a whole lot of this. Right?
Yeah.
You actually can find it fairly quickly. And in fact, one of our clients has started implementing our accountability process, and she has one of her direct reports will tend to meander. And as an extrovert, I understand the meandering conversation. I will own the meandering conversation. Sometimes my conversations meander. So, like, I get how that happens, particularly if you're an extrovert. But because of the process where it wasn't all having to be communicated verbally, some of it was done via a document beforehand, she was able to keep this thing under control. And she got herself and her person back an hour from what their meetings normally are. She said, our meetings are normally scheduled for 60 minutes. They usually run at least 90. Okay. So there we go. That's the first thing. And she said, my first meeting after this, because I was able to start managing this, she said, it only took us 40 minutes. That got her back both of them back almost an hour. That's 2 hours in a week.
Yeah.
That would be like 100 hours in a year. Right? That's a week's time for both of them. Right? So sometimes it's really about helping them manage it. But then there's some folks that don't want to be, and that becomes a problem. I think that the trick with that is being aware that if it's happening to you, it's probably happening to somebody else in the organization.
Yes. So important.
I think that's the thing. When you think this employee is only coming to you and doing this to you, that's probably not true.
Yeah.
Even though you're the owner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Sometimes like, well, they're doing it to me because I'm the one that has the answers. Da, 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 da. It's like, I bet that's not true. I bet they're not having these long conversations asking about lots of things all the time to just you. It's probably everybody.
Yeah. And that feeds in really well to the last kind of type or pattern that I've seen. And this is the like, I don't know, perpetual starter. So they are great at starting projects. They'll start a bunch of things at once, but they never get anything to the finish line. And oftentimes what happens is they'll get, a project will land in their lap and they're super excited. They get it started, but then they get distracted by something else. And so these are the people that oftentimes will run around putting out fires, but they never actually get the fire completely out because they're moving on to the next one and the next one. So you end up with a lot of, say, projects that are at the, sort of like the 90th percent. I would use a football term, but what is that, the 10-yard line or is that the 90-yard? I don't know how many yards there are in football. It doesn't matter. But almost to a touchdown, but not quite to a touchdown. And other people have to pick it up and close it. But because other people didn't start it, it takes them more time to close the deal than it would take the person who started it. And this is one in particular where I see accountability coming in, at least with, like in our organization, Gwen, because we don't lose sight of all the projects, or fewer projects will fall through the cracks when you have an established system of accountability to check in on things.
Now, the irony of this is often the person you're talking about is the owner.
So, okay, I'm going to let you say more about that for 1 minute.
The reason is because they're visionary and they like starting things. That's part of being an entrepreneur. It's all of those things. And I totally get it. But that typically is much more of an owner responsibility. But it's one of those places that we don't understand that we're creating the time-wasting environment. Because we're causing our people, whoever they are, in this case, it can be both contractors and employees, to be running around and starting this thing and thinking it's the thing. And then all of a sudden being told, oh no, we're doing this other thing. And so that thing gets left. Right. And so I think this is an interesting one because it often feels like it's a contractor, employee, someone working for us issue. But often it's our issue as the visionary entrepreneur that's actually creating this time-wasting environment because we're not allowing our people to take things because we're not focused enough. Now, this can also happen at that, at the contractor employee level as well. But honestly, in the environment, a lot of the clients that we see, I find it's more of an actual leadership issue than it is an employee or contractor issue. They're trying to keep up, but you keep shifting gears so fast they can't. And they're not allowed, using that a little bit loosely, to ever get to take things to the finish.
Yeah.
And then they also will create a level of frustration that then means they aren't necessarily working as efficiently.
All right, Gwen. So we've spent a majority of the episode talking about what it looks like how people can steal time from you, from the organization, from payroll, from their colleagues. We've talked about why that's a problem, how it shows up. So what do we do about it?
So one of the things that I think we have to do is actually be time conscious, right? So one of the things is you need to look at invoices if they're coming in from contractors or timesheets if they're coming in from employees and say, how much time are things going toward? And if you're getting this very generic, I spent 10 hours, this week, this month, whatever, and you have no idea specifically of that 10 hours, how it's being broken down, you don't have to have necessarily a minute by minute kind of, detail, but having some sort of an idea, I think you're at high risk, right? And it does take time on your part as the CEO to be paying attention to that, but it's time well spent, because a few hours, your biggest expense almost always for most businesses is your people expense.
Mm-hmm.
And so losing 10% of that could actually be a pretty giant number, even for a relatively small business.
Yeah.
And so keeping track of that, to me, is the very first thing. You've got to take time to actually look, and don't be afraid to ask questions. It's not that you don't trust them. It's you trying to understand. Now, if they get super defensive, like, well, why are you checking? And that to me is a flag, because if you're not willing to be able to explain, that's a problem, right? One of the things with contractors is I want contractors to be able to give me detail week by week by week. And I want to be able to get that information along the way, because I know, because I've been on the other side of this as a freelancer, I have watched people, it was never me because that's just not my personality, but I watched people who had to fill out timesheets once a month, and they would sit down on the 30th or the 31st of the month and figure out how much time they spent on a particular client. There is no way they actually know.
Right.
There is no way that they know. They're making that up. They're making guess. You may be getting the benefit of that, or you may be paying the cost of that, right? So make sure that you're getting timesheets and information in relatively short periods, and so that you can keep track of it. And then occasionally, I think it's important to do your very favorite thing, Tonya. You know what I'm going to say, a time study, right? Where you're actually paying attention to it, because often, and when I say a time study, I say everyone doing a time study, you as the owner, as well as everyone else. That's the place where all of a sudden you can start seeing the leakage of time, where it's like, wow, I didn't realize I was actually spending 2.5 hours every day in my email. It's like, it doesn't feel like that because it's 10 minutes here, it's 20 minutes here, and it's 5 minutes here, and it's this. And all of a sudden it's like, that's like a big chunk of my day. I don't need to be spending, and you realize that in that case, often it's the context switching, going from one thing to the other, that if you just said, I'm going to do 30 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes in the afternoon, you probably could still get all the email done, but you'd be saving yourself an hour and a half in this example. And so, not that you need to do it all the time. I would not ever do it more than once a quarter. I probably would say once or twice a year is more than adequate, unless you think you have a problem. And if you do think you have a problem, start asking for the information and find out, how long is it taking folks? Because the other thing that will happen is maybe it really does take you only 30 minutes, but most everyone else it takes an hour. And so when you think it's only taking 30 minutes, it's because it takes you 30 minutes. But part of the reason it takes you 30 minutes is you've been doing it for 20 years and you know exactly how you want to do it, and all of those things. And no one's ever going to be your brain. I remember this with one of my other clients where they said, but it shouldn't take that long. I said, yeah, but you actually have all of the answers to all of the questions.
Right.
Right. You get to make all of the decisions, and whatever you decide is the right answer. Someone else has to think about what would be best for the business, which is a different thought than it's my business. I know what's best for the business.
Right.
And it takes longer, right? So being aware of what those time pieces are. And then if you're seeing an issue, address it. Don't assume it's going to get better. I have never seen it get better. Ever.
Right.
It only gets worse. So if you're seeing, it's going to be a hard conversation, but you got to have it.
That is so true. And what I would say also is, I just want to have a little reframe, because you're very careful to call it a time study and not a task study. And this is something I see people get wrong. So task studies, I find, do make people get kind of the willies, because just from perspective, like the idea behind a task study is to see how long does it take you to complete a task. And then people start thinking, oh, they're going to scrutinize how long it takes me to do a thing. But a time study is really about just where does the time go? It doesn't so much matter how much time email takes you every single day, so much as you're looking at how is the day cut up. Because maybe what you don't know is that emails every Monday are 4 hours simply because so much email comes in over the weekend. But you're thinking, oh, well, like email's an hour a day, because when you think about how much time you spend on email, you're thinking Wednesdays. And Wednesdays, there's not a lot that's coming in. So that's where I think time studies are really helpful, is if you just look at them as how the day is broken up, day to day, week to week, versus carrying too much weight in how much time is spent on each individual thing. Because that's where you start to see the impact of the task switching. Now, we have another episode coming up, and we are going to record that right after this one. So you're going to hear that beeping smoke alarm in the background, but that's okay. We appreciate your patience and your consideration. We will be concluding this series with a conversation that's not nearly as fun to have, honestly, because it's about money theft. And this truly does affect your bottom line. This truly could bankrupt you, no ifs, ands, or buts. And so we're going to talk about not just the impact of it, but also how to recover from it. Now, if you already are recognizing patterns from either today's episode or elsewhere in the series, if you find that, you know what your team is accomplishing just doesn't quite match up with your expectations, and maybe you have tried everything we're suggesting and you're just still not able to figure it out, or you figured it out, but you're not sure what to do next, you don't have to keep doing this on your own, right? We offer a clarity call. You can actually book a call directly with Gwen at everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity. You can talk through your situation. Gwen can give you some very specific insights. It's not a sales call. It really is just a higher level of customization, a little bit more than what we can provide here in the podcast. But we would love to have that. And all you have to do to book that directly is at everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.